Backyard Green Films is proud to present this episode of Agri-Culture with your host, Alara Bowman. Alara and her husband Rick travel throughout the land in their teardrop trailer that they have nicknamed Maggie, bringing you stories about their travels and the people they meet. They visit farmers, ranchers, and just about anyone who loves putting their hands in the dirt or their feet in stirrups. For the past 3 years, they have been filming a documentary about heritage breed animals entitled The Holstein Dilemma, Heritage Breeds, and the Need for Biodiversity. In those travels, they have gotten to meet some very interesting people. Here's one of those interviews.
Hi, this is Alara, and welcome back to our podcast. Today's episode comes from Bide Farm in Newberg, Oregon, about halfway between Portland and McMinnville, Oregon. We visited this beautiful area in early August, although it was in the midst of a 95-degree bout of Oregon summer weather. It's just when everybody thinks of wool, haha, so of course we're bringing you sheep today. So now the time has come for me to do something I never thought I would do. I'm going to quote scripture. It's from the section in Genesis, chapter 30, where Jacob and Laban are discussing a products and services trade. From my reading, there seems to be a particularly zesty story in there about the trade for more than one wife, more than 2 women, lots of procreating, and a shifty, cheating father-in-law. But we're not going to concentrate on that part in this podcast, exciting as it sounds. Here's an excerpt from Genesis chapter 30. I will pass through all thy flock today, removing from thence all the speckled and spotted cattle, and all the brown cattle among the sheep, and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and of such shall be my hire. And I removed that day the he-goats that were ring-streaked and spotted, and all the she-goats that were speckled and spotted, and every one that had some white in it, and all the brown among the sheep, and gave them into the hands of his sons. So this passage goes on for a bit in chapters 30 and 31, mainly describing the livestock transaction, as well as the sheep and cattle and goats with some specificity. But the part that I find interesting is that it's said to be one of the earliest references to selective breeding. It's been theorized that the description of the sheep sounds remarkably like a Jacob's, which we're going to talk about today. I never thought I'd be using the Bible as a reference in an agriculture podcast, but for this animal, the passage seems perfectly applicable. We talked with Karen about the sheep she raises on her farm, namely the Jacob's American and Navajo Churro breeds. In today's episode, there's only a little bit of discussion about the Navajo Churro, but mostly in comparison to the Jacobs. We'll be sure to do a podcast in the future on the Navajo Churro sheep by themselves. We decided to include a bit of the discussion we had with her about the breeding decisions that farmers face today, as well as the considerations they have to keep in mind when they're raising and selling an agricultural product or animal. It's not an easy thing to put a breeding program in place, but many of us are isolated from the mental gymnastics required to make something like that successful. I have a hard enough time deciding which socks to wear each morning, and I can't even imagine how difficult it must be to keep or cull an animal that might mean the success or failure of your livelihood. Sometimes those decisions are potentially even the success and survival of the breed itself. Think about it. You have to calculate color, shape, size, health, behavior, lambing, fertility, personality, and ability to thrive. Then multiply by the number of genes in a sheep. Then you have to subtract by either 2 or 4 horns, including the current size and shape, and a little algebra for the likelihood of the direction of the horn growth in 4 years. Then spots on top of that. If you come up with an acceptable calculation, you then have to divide by the projected climate, feed availability, current economy, and potential market for your product 2 years from now, with 40 sheep. In this case, multiplied by 2 breeds. That's way too much higher math for me, and it's one reason why I pay top dollar for my food, so I don't have to do higher math, and I can support the people that do. Seems like a very reasonable trade to me. Even at 95 degrees, I thoroughly enjoyed this visit to see the incredibly unusual-looking animal that's the Jacob's American sheep. With all the spots and many of them having 4 horns sprouting in crazy loops around their heads. It's something you might expect to see at a zoo or the wild animal park. We'll be posting a few video clips on our Backyard Green TV page on YouTube so you can see for yourself. Here's Karen from Bide Farms. Introduce yourself if you would.
My name is Karen Lobb, and with my husband Doug Montgomery, we run Bide Farm, and we've been here for 25 years, raising 2 different breeds of heritage sheep.
Okay, so if you would tell me about how long does it like to farm here?
We have 4 distinct seasons here, none of them very serious. We get a couple of snow days a year if we're lucky. From about late July through September, it's fairly warm and dry.
Warm and dry is 90 degrees?
90. If we get to 100, everybody's whining like crazy, and they shut down farmers markets and things. We're wet in the spring and winter, but not nearly as wet as people give us credit for. Yeah. More than rain. What we have is a lot of gray skies, but it's very green here up until probably early July, and then for us, for instance, we can't irrigate, so we have this amazing abundance, and then boom, it goes heat dormant and we're dry.
So we're at 90 here the first week in August. We're at 85 or whatever it is today. It's gonna stay that way for a little bit?
Yeah, generally it's dry now until we hope that the rain comes back in like late September, early October, but the weather stays quite beautiful usually through mid-October, so it's very pleasant here.
Now, we were just talking about the flowers. I know I'm gonna jump from the climate to the flowers. Is this what would be called a hedgerow?
No, that would be much more dense. This is what you call the right-of-way, where if I could get sheep out here, they would eat all this, but there's no safe way to do it. But you have to fence back a certain amount so that this is essentially county property, even though it's yours, and they do mow it, which is awesome.
But we were talking earlier about the way that they forage, your sheep do, and the way that some of the older breeds do. Mm-hmm. And that if they will eat everything but the canes, you said, right?
Right, on the blackberries.
Okay.
Yeah, the canes, I just don't think, they're too tough and woody, and there's just nothing there for them.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they would eat all of this if I could get them out here. You can see in the pasture, there's nothing, and most of the blackberries are high enough that they can't reach them anymore.
Yeah, my chickens are like that too. It's scorched earth in the chicken yard.
Yeah.
You just don't realize how much they're just gonna pick the whole time. That's what they're doing. They're foraging.
And then we consider this a sacrifice area. This old barn, which is so amazing, is landlocked there's a road here, and where those blackberries are, there's a creek. And so there's this little bit, and there's a little bit on the back side. And so there's never going to be, in the spring you'll get a little growth, but it's just a sacrifice area because you could plant it all you wanted, but there's always a lot of animals on it.
Yeah.
So this is where we do our lambing here. We actually built another barn at one point thinking we would use it, but this barn is so awesome that we end up using it, and it works well. It's crowded when we're lambing, but it's so condensed that we can see, like I can go out back and see if anybody's lambing. I don't have to go, to the next pasture, and it actually works just so well. So if you want to go in, we can.
Yeah, we would love to if that's okay.
Watch out for traffic.
Okay, so this is so much the country here, it feels like it's hard to remember that you've got streets and a road.
This is a back roads way to get to the next town over, so it's much more heavily traveled than you'd expect. So we've got 2 purebred breeds here, Jacob and Navajo Churro sheep, and then we do I have my own designer breed of crossbred sheep.
The Jacob's and Churro?
These white, more border lustery looking things. Started out actually, we don't advocate crossing the Jacob and the Churro together, but what we did is we got a border luster ram, and it was some original girls that just were not throwing the breed quality that we wanted, and this is my way of justifying keeping them. They produce meat lambs for us. but it's still really mild, lean meat. And I love the crosses so much that I call it my designer breed. They're Bide Lesters. I have my own breed.
You know what? That people do that though. You can
I know.
You can
They
mix
do
a
with
little
dogs.
of this. We talked to a farmer in Matt DeVader. He farms in Kansas, and he's got Katahdins, and he's got his own little mixture he's got going.
Yeah.
A little bit more pest resistance here, a little bit more drought tolerance there, a little more cold hardiness, and he just got
Yeah, well, these
it's like
guys-
baking a cake.
They grow really fast. So this guy's the same age as the Jacobs, and you can see how much bigger he is. Love the fiber. The hand spinners still like it. Great hides, and sadly, I like them so much that I end up keeping a lot of the ewes. So I have a whole flock of ewes that I breed. But they're nice. But I mean, what we really do are the Jacob and Navajo Churro, and yeah, again, we don't advocate crossing them because they're both so great on their own. It just does not benefit either breed to do that.
I have to tell you, this is my first experience with Jacobs. We have
is it?
Yes. So can you tell me a little bit about that breed?
Yeah, they're a very old breed. They're named after Jacob in the Bible in Genesis 30, where he makes a deal with his father-in-law Laban to keep all the spotted and striped sheep and goats. And actually, that's the first reference to selective breeding anywhere in written history. Were they really the sheep Jacob had? Unlikely, but it's a nice story. And they did probably come from the Middle East originally.
So it is possible. There's some sort of legitimacy to the thing.
Yeah, I mean, they are a very, very old breed. What we raise here in the U.S. are called American Jacob sheep.
Yes.
Most recently, they came from England, where for several centuries they were used as like lawn ornaments on the great estates. They called them park sheep. And they weren't all that worried about keeping them pure at that point because they just wanted the decoration with the four horns and the spots. So then they came to this country. There was a couple importations in the early 1900s and then in the 1960s. And what we have today are all pretty much from that. So we have a big enough gene pool. We did save semen for the Fort Collins thing.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, on both breeds. And that was about the time that hoof and mouth was devastating England, and they were really concerned about what happens if it shows up on one farm, because they had a huge, if you were in, I don't remember the acreage, the miles, they would take any flock, and they were very concerned about it. So, but we don't generally
take any flock and
eliminate them.
Yeah.
Like, so if ours had it, somebody 10 miles away would probably also lose their flock.
Yeah, Southern California is dealing with that with the chickens in Vreel and Newcastle. They're taking every chicken and putting it down. And,
That's horrifying.
And that's your livelihood and your.
You like them,
Yeah, and well, for me, it's my pet. I would really have to think about my decision making there.
So, but we do have a big enough effective population that we don't really rely on AI. There's enough out there that you can usually find something unrelated.
So these are really distinctive looking sheep. They're not huge sheep, the Jacobs.
They're very small. An adult male might go 160 to 180 pounds tops. A female might be anywhere from 90 to 110. You get a few that'll top over that, a few that are small. And they do have the breed standard sets the parameters for the size. You can get too big, you can be too small. And so that, the commercial people look at them and they're like, well, these are useless. Well, they're really not for what they are. They're great small farm breeds because you don't need a lot of land. They're all going to leave you, aren't they?
Yes, they are. Are we scaring them here? Or?
No, it's just what they do. I can chase them back.
No. That's okay. We'll get footage there. So the spotted coat, is that a thing that happens with every one of them? All of them are spotted?
Yeah, they are the only truly spotted sheep that hold their spots for their entire life. So if you took a picture of a lamb from the side, that spotting pattern is still going to be there when it's 10 years old. It might be gray, it might be faded, it'd be bigger because their body grew. But most other breeds, if they have a spotted lamb, by the time they're, say, a year or two old, that will have faded to gray or whatever. And it's one of the first things you lose if you cross them. So typically, the Jacob is genetically a black sheep with white spots. It's kind of the opposite of what you think you're looking at. So if you cross it with virtually any other breed, you're going to get a black sheep.
So this is the zebra sheep.
Yes, and so you also generally lose the horns almost immediately. So the breed standard is very, very specific. It's probably one of the toughest breed standards of any. Navajo Churro is very similar. But there's extremely specific criteria. You have to have the spots on the face and percentage of color on the body, and the wool has to be between this range and that range, and they're not structurally a really stout sheep like the commercial breeds, but they still have to move okay, and so it's an amazing number of things and then you get the horns involved, and so like a forehorn should have some space between the top and the side horns. It shouldn't grow into their head, so it's surprisingly difficult to get really great breed quality Jacobs, and we have to send a photograph of every animal, and on the males for the Jacobs we send a fleece sample. So whereas a lot of breeds they just self-certify, I've got a Corriedale or I've got a Suffolk. Here you actually have to, it's inspected by 2 different people to see that it meets the breed standard, and so it's surprisingly challenging to race a nice Jacobs.
Well, what comes to mind with me when you talk about that is the Rubik's Cube, which I'm terrible at, but you can get all the parts right and you're missing this one.
Exactly.
So how do I understand that there's some crazy combination that you can do to make the Rubik's Cube come out correctly and to move that one space around. How do you do it with a sheep?
It's you buy the best ram you can, you use the best ewes, you do everything right. My philosophy is, so if that ram has one little thing you don't like, that is exactly what he'll throw every time, and not the beautiful head. It's really a bit of a genetic crapshoot. You start out with what you like and you aim for what you like, but we butcher, we cull pretty heavily. So I got a little guy this year that's beautiful forehorn head, but he's already touching between his top and side horn, and their horns grow so much by the time they're yearlings that there's no way he's going to maintain. It's going to start doing strange things as that lower horn, the top horn will start to take over the blood supply, and the next thing you know he's got some gnarl, or might be growing into his head, or so he's not going to be visibly attractive, but he's also going to potentially have issues that might be life-threatening if he were left to his own devices. So in fact I was having this conversation with myself. It's just, I look at him now and he's just like and just for that little bit of space he's going to be in the locker,
Yeah.
But when you're trying to keep a purebred breed and you're trying to keep a look, you have to be pretty careful about what you're saving and what you're breeding. And we never stop. So you could have 5 generations of registered Jacobs. Every animal still has to be presented for registration, because there's just no guarantee, since we are somewhat phenotypic. It's about how they look. You can have your 2 best animals and they throw things and you're like, oh, put it back, it's horrible, and it happens in E-flock, it happens 5-6 generations down the road. So we have made the decision that you will never not have them visibly inspected, because you could lose that look that we're so fond of. So.
We have a little guy looking at us from the corner.
Yeah.
Maybe go around just a little bit.
Actually, we can go in the barn if
that would be great.
That goes around into the back of the barn. So
one of the things that you had said was that they're going to have those spots for the rest of their life.
Yes.
When you shave them, do they look the same as when they're fluffy?
Yeah, they'll be much more black and white. They kind of brown out with the sun, and then when you shear them, they're just like all pristine, and they're so adorable. You forget that they get a lot of wool, and they start to look pretty big, but there's not that much under there. There are smaller sheep, but they're not a huge sheep, and they're so cute when they're sheared. I just love them. Let me open this if I can. Okay, well, that went pretty well.
All right. Hi, guys.
You're welcome to. So this is our awesome barn.
Boy, you're not kidding.
This is why it stays cooler in the summer and warmer in the winter, and we actually store hay up in the loft, and it was built about 1905, and it's just
gorgeous.
It's a great barn. So yeah,
it just dropped 15 degrees easily.
I know, it's amazing. These people knew what they were doing when they built these things, and it has still. You can see they would have stored the hay loose at the time when this was built, and so there's a giant pincher thing that would have gone over to the door on the other side and would have picked up the loose hay, and you would have stored it loose up in the loft. But yeah, it's just a great barn. It's a little bit of a challenge though, because you have to clean this one wheelbarrow load at a time because of the wood floors. So if it's that's a challenge for us.
Yes, you need a neighborhood kid that's
looking
to buy.
In hindsight, we might have wanted to have some children. So
Now, I'm seeing a lot of these little ones, and I want to say little guys, but the horns can be both male and female, is that correct?
They have to have horns. The females have to have horns. So if you look straight ahead, there's a little girl walking, and she has little nubs on her head. Mm-hmm. She's actually broken all 4 of her horns at this point. They will grow back. There's a little ram. The ram horns get big much faster. The girls keep fairly feminine heads. You can sort of tell, the ear tags are on the left and the girls on the right and the boys. So that kind of gives you a clue.
Smart.
Right now, it's not as obvious, but when you look at yearlings, the boys will have very massive heads and the girls are much more feminine looking. But they do break their horns. It's not uncommon at this age. And by the time it grows back, you'd hardly know that it had broken. Maybe just the tip is rounded rather than pointy. But if they lose them when they're adult, they've usually just lost it. It's not going to come back. So they grow probably till they're maybe 4 or 5 years old. The bulk of the growth happens in the first year, but like on the rams, it'll just start to get thicker and denser. And it's not like tree rings, but you'll start to see denser ribs, so they don't grow as much when they get older. But they definitely continue to grow.
Now they can go in any direction too, can't
they? They can, and that's another thing that you would potentially eliminate one from the gene pool. If the horns, if left to its own devices, those horns would grow into their head or into their body. You could, and we will trim them because we're not going to let them, suffer. But that's an animal you really don't want in the gene pool because that is somewhat heritable, and you don't want to produce a whole lot more like that.
So with yours, do you want them to have perfect horns, different horns?
You want attractive horns. Okay. There are some flocks where there are only 4 horns. We love the 2 horns too, so we do both. I also think it's really, when you're raising a purebred breed, especially a heritage breed, I think it's important to step back occasionally and say, okay, because we're selecting for our preference, are we now starting to actually move away from the breed? I mean, we're not going outside the breed, but I think within the breed, it would be very easy to kind of move outside of the...
That's one thing that, we talked to Kerry Fowler, and he said, we've been genetically modifying our animals for thousands of years. We just do it faster now. But with selection, we selected for a reason usually.
Yes.
Because we liked a characteristic.
Right.
So, it's not anything that we haven't been doing.
But
forever.
no, it isn't. And, the 4-horn is recessive to the 2-horn. So if you don't save the 4-horn, you could lose it pretty quickly, although it's in there. You can breed 2 4-horn parents and get all 2 horns. You can get a set of twins that are one of each. So it's in there. It's a giant genetic. If you only bred 4 horns, you would probably at some point get to the point where you mostly only had 4 horns. Mm-hmm. We think the breed includes both, and I love a good 2-headed, 2-horned ram. So we don't actually selectively. I mean, I think we had 3 4-horns and 1 2-horn ram that we used last year. But we'll say we're saving a 2-horn that I really love, and he's going to go into our breeding program. And so, I think when you also have to be careful if you start selecting only for what you like. Well, maybe the farmer over there really prefers a different look or a different style of fleece, and so you could end up not selling.
I am sorry. I know I looked distracted. All the sheep left, and all of a sudden I'm looking over there, and I said, "Holy cow, that's not a sheep!
Really giant sheep.
He's a monstrously large llama."
But they do make if they have the right personality, they can make great guards. Not all of them make great guards.
You don't find out till later on that one.
No, you can actually tell.
Can you?
If you go and there's several llamas in a pasture, you want the one that comes up to the fence to find out what's going on. You want them really curious and inquisitive. You don't necessarily want them to spit at you, but and they can. But you want the one that wants to know what you're doing, and he'll do that. When somebody walks down the road, he'll be right at the fence, eyeballing them and checking them out. You don't want to buy the one that goes to the back and goes, I don't care what you're doing.
Yep.
So it's pretty easy to see if you're going to get one, which ones are going to have the instinct.
That's so interesting.
They're the nosy ones, basically.
So this guy was nosy right off the bat, huh?
Yeah. Well, most everything we have like that is usually a rescue or someone gets out of it and they give them to us. Or he came with a buddy who's at our upper barn, and the buddy is not such a great guard, but what the heck, We're already feeding too many animals, what's one more? So, but he does hang out with the dogs occasionally, like when the neighbor dog is on the fence line, he'll be up there with the dogs kind of watching out. So llamas are really great in small situations, small pasture situations like this. because they can really manage it well. This would be kind of too small for a dog, but for a llama, this is perfect. And so we use a combination. We use llamas in small paddock areas and dogs in bigger area.
Yeah, the Navajo Churros and the Jacob are both really, really ancient breeds, and they're both
They
pretty
are.
rare. So
They
why
are.
did you choose these?
We decided we were going to get a few sheep to keep the farm deferral, which defers the property taxes if you have a working farm in Oregon.
Agricultural production land altogether, right?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Any you can get a timber deferral, you can get a farm deferral, and this property had a farm deferral on it, and when you buy it, oftentimes it comes with it, but then you have to continue to farm to keep it.
Yes.
And they would check up on you, and they. So we just got the first 5 little Jacob girls. I read an article in a fancy, it was called Countryside, but it wasn't the one we all think of. It was a glossy, they had Dior.
Better Homes and
it
Gardens
was like
kind of thing,
really.
yeah.
And I saw this picture of these amazing sheep. I had no idea sheep were spotted and had horns. And that was kind of 25 years ago. The internet wasn't really much of a tool in those days. So then I got on the phone and started making calls. I found a lady in Iowa who had some, who actually knew somebody in Oregon that had them. And so we went to see them and meet them. And we got the last 5 sheep from these 2 farms, because they were going for a little more money in those days. It was 94 is when we got them.
Lawn ornaments are expensive there.
They were, and knowing what I know now, I might not have bought any of those 5. I mean, I don't know what didn't kick in that was the last 5 sheep from 2 farms, but one of them turned out to be my absolute best friend, and I wouldn't have gotten her. She was not picture perfect. So anyways, when we went to look at the Jacob, that farm also had Navajo Churro sheep, which I'd never even heard of. It's considered the original American sheep, and I'd never heard of it. And we were just fascinated, and my husband said, we should get some of those. And my husband never suggests animals. And I said, okay. So we
Sounds like my marriage.
Yes. So we had them within like 6 months. We had both breeds. The Jacobs, we just got 5 ewe lambs because we knew nothing. I'd never even had animals before. So we were just going to kind of get our moves down. And we went to get our churros. We had to buy them from another farm because they didn't have any for sale at the first farm. And she's like, well, why don't you just buy some bred ewes? And we're like, no, we're not ready for that. And she's like, well, why don't you just get a ram and some bred ewes? And we're like, no, we're not ready for that. Well, we came home with 7 bred ewes and a ram and had lambs that next spring. And the rest is history. But when we first met the sheep, was just, for us, it was kind of like we knew what we wanted to do when we grew up. We love them. But we love the idea of an old breed that was kind of more original to what sheep would have been like. And the theory is they're hardier. We believe that. They eat a lot less ground. Stocking rates are higher for these guys than they would be for the big breeds.
Do they both have kind of the similar, do they both lamb the same pest resistance, same kind of
They're very
characteristics?
similar. I'd say wool and personality are the 2 biggest differences. The Navajo Churro have a carpet wool, a weaving wool. It's double coated and they grow an inch of wool a month. And so we share them twice a year.
Yeah, I mean, 90 degrees here. How do these sheep
Actually,
do?
wool insulates from heat as well as cold.
That's
so,
it, yeah.
I mean, a freshly sheared sheep is actually going to be hotter than, you don't want to let them go for years, but, sheep, these lambs out here will be sheared in about a month, and they're only like 5 months old, so they'll be sheared at 6 months old. So the Jacobs grow like a half an inch of wool a month, so it's a once a year shear.
The Navajo Churro, obviously, we were actually going to go and see them on the reservation.
Yeah, they're native to the desert Southwest. We're different here, but they do fine here. They're all over. They're in Wisconsin. They adapt. Probably the main difference is we trim toes more often because it's more damp here, and we shear twice a year. In the desert Southwest, sometimes you can get away with going once a year, but with 10 to 12 inches of wool, it can be a challenge to find a mill that can do that much length. It's a lot of wool to spin. So we do it every 6 months, and you get like 4 to 6 inches, which is manageable, and the hand spinners are fine with it.
So this is a
Both of
hand
these
spinner
are.
sheep, is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, basically, if a mill was buying, I don't know honestly if there are any mills buying these days, they might pay you 70 cents a pound. A well-skirted, clean, nice fleece to a hand spinner we charge like $16 a pound. Now, they're not huge fleeces, but still makes it worth the sharing. And so we manage our fleeces to try and keep them clean for hand spinners, because hand spinners are very particular. They want it very clean, debris-free, basically. So they're... the personality, the differences we see, the Jacobs are much more goat-like, much more gregarious as a rule. They're kind of in your face. This panel in front of the barn is to keep the Jacobs out.
Navajo Churros couldn't care less.
If the Jacobs were all in here, and I've had that, there's like 40 sheep on top of all the hay, there would be a handful of Navajo Churro out front going, I don't think you're supposed to be in there, but not coming in because it's not. And I think, they tend to be, I'm going to say they're a little more wary of human motives, the Navajo Churro. And I don't know if that's how they're on the reservation. They'll go up to summer pasture. I mean, they're attended to, but they haven't been quite maybe as domesticated as the Jacob in smaller situations.
Yeah.
Both great mothers.
They do twins often?
Twins
or
are
singles?
more common. Singles, first-time moms. Twins are more common. Triplets occasionally, although I'd really rather not, just because we'll typically let the mom nurse the triplets, but you got to keep a closer eye, and typically one of them is going to be a little smaller, and so twins are great, or a big healthy single for us.
So the hand spinners and the wool movements kind of had a resurgence in the last little bit. Is that helping you?
The Northwest has always sort of been a hotbed of spinning activity. I don't know why.
They have the Oregon Wool and Fiber Fest up here that's really big.
And we have the Black Sheep Gathering, which is in Albany, actually, the fairgrounds where you're at.
Yeah.
But yes, they're niche wools. They're not for every project, but the Navajo Churro is probably the quintessential weaving wool. It's amazing. It's double coated, has an inner downy, fairly fine inner coat, and then an outer, more guard hair-like outer coat. And then when you mix the two together, you get the softness from the inner and the durability from the outer. So it makes excellent rugs, outer garments. It felts beautifully, but it's not something you tend to wear next to your skin. Maybe a lamb fleece that was soft, but Jacob is much more of a garment. It's considered a down breed, so it's kind of springy and lofty. If you were to make a sweater out of it, it's going to be pretty light in weight, but it'll be nice and warm. So they have different, and then the other thing both actually, the Jacob, I sort by color, so I can get 3 colors of yarn easily. So a hand spinner might buy it because they can get several colors out of one fleece. The Churro, there's some that are called a badger face pattern. Well, here's a little one over there. You can see it's white with gray, with kind of brown on it.
Oh, on the far side?
Yeah, and then there's
the one that's turning around, itching right now? Okay.
And then, you can get a myriad of any natural color, basically, but on some of them, you can actually get several colors out of one fleece. So they're kind of interesting, too.
So the solid black one here, that's
a Navajo Churro, yeah.
That's a Navajo Churro. So the Navajo Churros come in what different colors? They're
Every
just
color.
solid.
They can be white, they can be white with tan, they can be browns, a bunch of shades of brown. There's patterns. You can have patterns on top of colors. There's one walking just out of sight there. That's a badger face pattern because their face kind of looks like a badger.
Yep.
And they're typically either a black sheep with a badger pattern or a brown sheep with a badger pattern. So it could be a brown badger, a black badger, or a gray badger. And some people really focus on the colors. That's a little white Navajo Churro ewe right there. Staring at us.
No horns. One of the few.
No, they can have horns, but they can also be polled, or they can have skers, which are a little small, usually not much of a blood supply to them. And all of that's okay. And even in the rams, you can have a polled ram. It's not very common, and we like horns on them, so we tend to get horns on all. Even though most of our ewes are polled or hornless, most of our rams are horned. So, and they can also have the 4 horns that the Jacobs can have.
Interesting. Perfect set there, aren't they?
Yeah, he's actually, I'm probably going to hang on to him to use next year.
So you were saying about the lilac, what the color pattern?
It's a brown probably version. It can look kind of dusty, gray, it can look brown, and it's probably brown. We haven't done the testing on it like breeds like the Churro have, but there was a little girl and she just walked behind the feeder. But it's pretty. It can fade faster sometimes, and then when they're adults, you don't have a whole lot of color. It just depends on the animal. But a lot of people really love the lilac. The babies are really beautiful and adorable. There's a little 4-horn Navajo Churro ram, the white little guy there.
Now, he's pure?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
It's less common in the Navajo Churro, but it's definitely in the genetics.
This one right here?
Yeah, the little white guy that's head's kind of down. But
So this one,
he's a Churro with 4 horns.
he is, yes. And I don't know where our little. Now here's this little dark guy right in front of us here. That's a little Jacob. He was a ram. He's been neutered because he's too dark to pass the breed standard for ram. So he's a wether or neutered male.
now when you say too dark, you mean too much solid dark?
Too
or
much
you
solid.
Mean...
There's no evidence of spot. Not much evidence of spotting.
So he's got a cute little face.
He is, but we have a small market for pet wethers and for hand spinners, and a lot of our rams live with a wether. That's their companion, so they have uses. If he was kept intact as a ram, his probably only use would be to be butchered. So this way he might go as a pet or a. But so like then right behind him is a ram that has a little more spotting. He's. You can't get any darker in theory than like 85%. He's probably 80. He's acceptable.
And he's standing right in front. Oh, okay, now he's moving, but he was standing right in front of us. Perfect shot there.
Yeah.
Yes, that one.
Yeah. So he's acceptable. He's getting on the dark side of acceptable, and that's going to be a breeder preference thing. So if a breeder has a lot of dark ewes, they're probably not going to take him because you can go dark pretty fast.
So this one on the left that's coming up to the water right in front of
that's
us.
a little ewe lamb.
So she's pretty much perfect, or
she's pretty good. She's got a nice little head, space between her upper and side horns, nice percentage. I would call her about 50% black. She's got some markings on her feet, which is a lot of breeders prefer. They want knee spots and hawk spots and the whole 9 yards.
a little hard on her back leg.
Yeah. And one of the things about Jacobs, which is why it's hard to do well with them in a show, they're a primitive breed, so they slope off at the tail head. You notice and they're a little narrower in their back legs. And what the modern breeds have done is they have pulled that tail head up and they've moved the legs out. You get a bigger leg of lamb that way. You get a stouter looking animal. But these guys, because their tail head is sloped, when they go to lamb, the baby just slides right out. So it's the perfect. And the churros are that way too. And it's the perfect way to be if you want a lamb without a lot of work or hassle. But as modern breeds have been improved, they've changed the position of the tail. If you go to a fair and look at the commercial breeds, they're just absolutely straight right across the top.
Do they have issues with fly strike the way other sheep might?
They could. We don't. We dock tails, as you can see, their tails would fall naturally to their hock or their back of their knee. We dock because we had 95 lambs this year, and I want to be able to see pretty easily if they've got diarrhea. It's a preference. They could do fine with the tail on, and a lot of breeders don't dock. It's just something that we've chosen to do because from a management standpoint, we think it makes it easier to keep an eye on who's got a little diarrhea or oftentimes when they start eating solid food, you'll get a little bout of diarrhea as they're, or they're picking up everything in their mouth like a baby.
Now we've talked about the wool quite a bit. Tell me about this as a meat breed.
They're small. Their hanging weights are never huge, and we don't actually start butchering until they're about a year old, which in the American meat lamb industry would have you butcher everything by 6 to 8 months. And I explain that to my customers, my lamb customers, and why they just mature slowly. If I butchered at 6 months old, I would have a roaster. I wouldn't have any carcass. But they're also very mild flavored, very lean. They don't tend to put on much fat. It's rare to see a really fat Jacob or Churro. And so you could butcher an older ewe who might be 5, 6 years old, and I would defy most people to know if you didn't tell them that it wasn't lamb. So they never get very strong. But we also learned early on, we have to do USDA, full USDA, because I sell lamb cuts, and our current butcher hangs them for 7 to 10 days, and the hanging makes an immense difference in the tenderness. The flavor was always amazing, but hanging makes them also quite tender, and it's something we learned by accident. But yeah, we do older animals, and I actually sell ground mutton at my farmer's market, and I don't have it year round, but usually when I get it, it sells out pretty quick. But it took time. I would give like my lamb customers a free package to try because they're like, oh, mutton, I don't know. But the other thing that people don't consider, in the cattle industry that each breed tastes different. The same is true of sheep. You get these kind of medium coarse wool breeds. You tend to get oftentimes a leaner meat, a milder flavor. You can get big, like your Leicester long wools, which would be your Cotswolds and your Border Leicesters, and so they're big animals, but they're still pretty lean, pretty mild. And you get to the finer wools, and somehow it's tied into the, they've done studies, and it's tied into the lanolin, and the more lanolin, the finer the wool, often the stronger the flavor of the meat.
Interesting.
So, if you don't like the particulars, if you're buying from a farmer and it's stronger flavor than you want, find a different breed. We don't get a lot of complaints. Usually once people have our lamb, they're back. But we've had a few British people think it's not strong enough.
Well, but it's age dependent too, isn't it? Because in a way,
it can be.
Oh no, I'm saying all
guys,
these factors are important.
Oh sure, yeah.
But the longer an animal is alive, the more opportunity it has to uptake nutrients and minerals and things like that. And it's my understanding the flavor does get a little stronger. So you're not going to mix this into that.
It'll get a little stronger, it'll get a little tougher generally as they get older. And so like when we do mature rams, if we butcher them, we wait until spring when it's not breeding season. So the rams have a slight smell, nothing like a goat buck. And you're gonna get it in the fall at breeding season in the rut essentially. But if you do them in the spring, you don't get that. And then we make sausage, and we have a variety of sausages and stuff. So, some of it is when you butcher them, but they do, even the mutton on these breeds tends to be pretty mild flavored.
We never ate much lamb when I was growing up, and so I have a tendency to think of lamb as that one thing that's a little fattier and it kind of has that taste. So it can, but there is very definitely something to the thing that says try it differently, and try it differently before you say, oh no, I don't like lamb.
I usually get like a husband and wife, and one of them loves lamb and the other won't touch it with a 10-foot pole. And I'm like, okay, try the ground. You can do it however you do your beef. If you can eat the burger, which is what's left after you take the prime cuts, you can eat the prime cuts. You're going to really love the prime cuts. So, because that's going to have the most fat, and the fat in lamb is where you're going to get the flavor, the strong flavor.
A lot of animals.
Yeah, I'm sure that's true. Yeah.
Yes.
But you don't get marbled meat like you do with cattle. Generally it's external fat. It's on the edges of the meat as opposed to in the meat.
Okay, so for this type of lamb, are we talking about mostly stews, or is this a leg or a chop or
I do all the prime cuts. I do French racks, chops, legs, shoulders. The prime cuts would be through the leg, and then shoulder, shanks, that would be your slow cooker type one. I sell organ meat, several kinds of sausage.
Something we don't do much in this country.
No.
Offal,
Yeah.
Offal, yeah.
But I do have a market for it, and I sell pretty much everything, and
that's a good thing, I think.
It is, and it really, there was a time when all people wanted were the prime cuts, the stuff that's quick to cook and tender, but most chefs are taught to use every bit of it, and I know the Navajo Churro have something called it's a slow food program. It's the Arc of Taste.
I was going to actually bring that up next. I'm so glad you did.
And the Navajo Churro were the first sheep breed to go on the Arc of Taste because they're a domestic breed, and they had a lot of powwows where they were they're calling it the presidium, the lamb presidium, and it's really concentrated on the Navajo Nation to try and find ways for the Navajos to be able to sell more of their meat. But they were explaining to the chefs that you know how to cook this. You were taught how to cook this. Buy the whole carcass. Don't just buy, use the whole carcass. And you should, if you're any kind of chef, you should be able to use it. You should be able to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now the Arc of Taste is, from my understanding, concentrated on things that have either a cultural significance or some historical significance, but foods that we associate with something. So for obviously Navajo Churro sheep, the Navajo Churro people use the wool for their blankets. That's why that Navajo blanket is kind of coarse. But they use the milk. They use the meat. It's definitely a part of their culture.
Yes, very much so.
Encapsulated in this
very
animal.
Much so.
The milking Devon might be a encapsulation of the Pilgrims when they came over in the 1600s, because that was the cow. So I could see how the Arc of Taste both might pick up Navajo Churros and the Jacobs.
The Jacob may be on it by now, I'm not sure. I know they were looking, it's just a slow process because what they do a lot of tastings but they're looking for breeds that are really heritage breeds. A lot of the breeds that are on the Livestock Conservancy's list of conservation breeds have ended up on the Slow Foods Arc of Taste, because that's the kind of thing they're trying to preserve. And it's poultries and it's vegetables and it's, it's all of any of the things that have fallen out of favor as people wanted bigger, engineered things.
We spoke with somebody at the fair yesterday, and they raise, I think they raise Jacobs as well. Anyway, it was sheep. She said, we had the shearer come in and he sheared our sheep, and we didn't know we weren't really raising them for the wool. So we said, what do we do with it? He says, okay, well, I'll take it. So that was the first year. And the second year, he came back in and he said, I'll take the wool. And she said we had thought that these animals didn't really, especially this one ram, that maybe his wool wasn't good after the first year, so we thought nothing of it. But it was that the weather had changed and the food components had changed. There was a heat wave, and it impacted the staple length and the
environment.
Quality.
Some of it's genetic, but environment is huge. The weather, if that animal's ill, if the food, so you might be buying the same alfalfa from the same grower, but it's better this year than it was last year. Or your grass might have more protein this year than it did last year. So you're doing everything the same as far as but the results can be totally different. A really dry, hot summer can just dry the fleeces out. We have some friends that raise Navajo Churro in high desert in Washington. And so if we would both bring fleeces to a wool show, we have so much more moisture here. Mine feel silkier, same fleeces, but mine feel silkier because they have more moisture in them. She has all this blowing dust, and so it just sucks the lanolin right out of the wool. And so it might be an absolutely beautiful fleece, but it just doesn't look and feel as nice because I have more moisture. If you feed more alfalfa as opposed to grass, that's more protein. You're gonna get, that's hair. It's gonna, so there's a lot of variables.
I just have to say thank you for lining them up so perfectly like this, so we could see the pattern there on that backside.
I had one day I took, and it was all Jacobs on one side, all black churros on the other side, and they were just like perfectly lined up. It's like,
how long did it take to train them to do that?
Yeah.
Yeah, just beautiful. But it's a nice, it's a nice size sheep, easy to manage, I bet, because you could really almost pick one of those up if you had to.
It is easier. They make, a lot of times the big commercial breeds, they've bred them to be fairly docile because they're so big. So these guys have a lot of personality, and it's not uncommon for people to buy Jacobs to use for dog herding after their dog has gotten so, because the sheep are so boring and they do what you expect them to do. Jacobs don't do what you expect them to do. They don't have a great flocking instinct like a lot of breeds. So if you put 5 of them there and the dog is standing there, it's going to be every man for himself. They're going to go different, and you can see it in their eyes. You can see them going, maybe I can go over her head. I'm sure I can take, and they scatter, and that can be a little frustrating some days. But on the other hand, I really like smart. I like a sheep that has a brain.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Wonderful. So this is your big group, and did you want to see
we have some rams if you want to see a few
I would
rams.
love to see yes, I would love to. You have give me sheep terminology here. I know wether and
a wether is a neutered male, a ewe is a female, a ram is a male. Some people will call them bucks, which is more typically used for goats.
Okay, so intact
male.
It
would be an intact. A lamb is the baby, and a sheep is your adult. They're all sheep, but a lamb is a baby, and then so that's kind of how it goes. So.
Wow, we just came around and saw that.
Yeah, so that is. So here he comes.
Somebody's
there. This is Roy Rogers. I did notice early this morning he tore the lower eyelid, which we'll keep an eye on.
Is that your other llama?
That's his wether, Ricky, but Roy Rogers is a ram that we bought from another farm. and he is truly an impressive
Just
boy.
a quick note, here's a spot where Rick crawls under a fence to get a great shot, and Alara stands there holding the fence just in case he has to run back in a hurry from an angry ram.
No, these guys, oh, I see them, they're clear under the tree over there.
This is the part where I say Jim is going to go
can
into
get
the
you-
river and fight the anaconda.
I can get you there. Hang on. They went in the back pasture, which you can see from here. This is another, this was one pasture, and then we made it 2, and then we made it 3, and it's
Portable fencing is a beautiful thing, isn't it?
one thing we've learned is don't ever do anything temporary because it becomes permanent. It just works.
Oh boy, look at him.
Yeah.
Wow.
I think he's like 8 this year. He's getting up in age, but he's still, because he's living with the weather, and he always has, he hasn't done a lot of headbutting, which can be really hard on a ram's spine over the years, but the weather doesn't fight. So we find that if you keep a ram with the weather, they actually will go a lot. They can breed a lot older than they would otherwise. It's probably the number one problem you run into with a ram, if it's been fighting a lot, is they start to have problems with their spine, and then they can't use their back legs like they need to. And
Well, I look at what he's carrying around his head, and I'm thinking, no wonder he might have spine problems.
Yeah.
That's just massive.
Yeah, and you can kind of see on the top of his head where it's smoother, and that would have probably been his first year's growth. And then you start to see rings, and they get denser and denser as they go down. And that's the aging. So every year, one of those, if you're up close to him, you can see like there's a lump kind of lower down near his skull.
So they don't drop these grow for life.
Yeah, they each have a blood supply. So if you were to feel his top horn, it would be warm, maybe about 6-8 inches from the skull up, and that's where the horn core is in the blood supply. And then above that, it's solid. So like when people use the horns to make shepherd's crook candles, that kind of thing, they're going to use the solid portion of it oftentimes.
This is great. This is a beautiful spot.
It's very pretty out here. We feel very blessed to be out here.
I needed to ask you, bide a wee, what does that mean?
It means stay a while or sit a spell. It's in the British Isles, apparently, there's inns and pubs, and it's a fairly common, and I got it out of a book from the 20s. And when we lived in Portland, I had a bench that said bide a wee. My husband made for me, and then we moved out here. We brought the bench, and we were trying to come up with a farm name. That's what we had.
That is absolutely beautiful. I love it. And we have stayed a while.
Yes.
Thank you so much for the farm tour. We started
Sure.
here, we're ending here, but boy, what a striking thing that you get to see on a daily basis. It's wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. If you liked our podcast, please subscribe. This is how we keep going. And please tell your friends to join us. Please feel free to post any questions or comments that you might have to our social media sites. Our Twitter feed is at Backyard Green Films, spelled BKYRDGREENFILMS. Our Instagram is at Backyard Green Films, BACKYARDGREENFILMS. Our Facebook is Backyard Green Films. Our YouTube URL is youtube.com/backyardgreentv.
We want to thank Karen for having us at her farm today. If you'd like more information about Karen and her farm and the sheep that they raise, the Jacob and the Navajo Churro, please visit their website at bideaweefarm.com. That is spelled BIDEAWEE farm.com. You have been listening to Agri-Culture with your host, Alara Bowman. Please tune in for more upcoming episodes from our travels. We'd also like to thank our producer, Michelle Council. I'm Rick Bowman, your behind-the-scenes editor. Until next time. This has been a presentation of Backyard Green Films Productions, all rights reserved, copyright 2019.